So I got a question from Movie Lover 2172. Question is, I have a $1,600 budget for a body. Okay. What camera should I go for? Mainly video, but I also shoot photos sometimes. I'm thinking about the A7C, the R8, Z5. Please make up my mind. Now, when it comes to camera recommendations, a couple things that are needed to know, especially with relation to the idea of context. So my question in response was, what lenses do you currently have? And what is the type of videos that you're gonna be shooting? Is it family, client, travel? This is always a question you need to always keep in mind. The response I got from Movie Lover is, I don't have any lenses right now. I use my brother's system, which is APS-C. I mostly shoot family videos and photos. Suggest to me any camera you want. It can also be any of these other three. Specifically looking for a good dynamic range or great dynamic range. Skin color is my love. I was thinking about the Fuji XS20, XS20, but lenses are very expensive. Okay, so what I want to showcase to you is I've put together this spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is essentially this gear list is the gear list that I use for some of the folks that I work with relation to work, because we do a lot of educational stuff. We do seminars, we do training for just globally. And so with that, our instructors tend to need to get set up with gear. And so generally my go-to recommendation for somebody who doesn't have anything yet for their own and they want to get set up, my recommendation is to default to Sony. And the reason for that is there are certain things that you're going to be looking for in general that you need to rely on. And it's not going to give you any hiccups. So especially in the case of video, the things that you want to rely on are things like autofocus, lens selection, automatic settings. That's going to be something that's going to be important, especially in a situation that's dynamic, especially in a situation where you don't want to be able to you don't want to be fiddling with the camera so much. And at the same time, you don't want to be running into any kinds of weird limits with relation to technology overheating, all of those different things. So, and usually when it comes to my recommendations, photo recommendation is almost to the side. It's something that I don't even consider. But if you do want to be able to take photos, then the only thing that may be worth considering is having a mechanical shutter as opposed to an electronic shutter. We'll kind of go into that. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, the things that you had mentioned were full frame lenses. And this is in relation to the video that I posted, which was in relation to the Canon R8. And so Canon R8 is a full frame camera. However, the Canon R8 by itself, if we look at Amazon, the Canon R8 by itself retails for about $1,500. But the challenge with that is for $1,500, all you get is a body. That's it. You're not gonna get any lenses. You're not gonna get any SD cards. You're not gonna get any lights. Like all the things that you need. And so if you have a budget, and this is for anybody else that's also watching, is that if you have a budget for a media kit, a media gear setup, then you're gonna want to consider several things. You want to consider body and lenses. You're going to want to consider cage, tripod, all of these different accessories. So I'm going to walk through this setup here, and I can also help you with maybe getting a combination selection that would be suited for you. And I got a couple examples to showcase. So first, my suggestion is if you're starting out and you don't have any cameras right now, then I would suggest for now, put aside the thought of a full frame camera and consider this. This is the Sony Alpha ZV for non-Americans, Echo E10. And so the good thing about this camera, I've got two of these right here. I've got another one over there. So in total, I work with 3 of these, and I use these to shoot long form content, a lot of talking head stuff like this. That's multi-camera. And these guys also pair well with my GH5, mainly because of not so much the color depth, but more so the dynamic range that these guys have. Sony tends to have some of the best dynamic range, especially due to the option of picture profiles that are available for you to select within the Sony menu. So the body alone for the ZV-E10 with a single battery in your basics kit is gonna run you about $700 brand new. Now, if you wanna save some money, you might be able to get it used for a little bit less than that, maybe like $650. If you go on eBay or something like that, but I tend to go, I like to purchase this kind of stuff from Amazon, especially if it's any kind of gear that's more than or less than a year or two old. I'll typically go to Amazon for that, just for the reliability factor. Anything older than that, I'll happily go to eBay. So that's the first thing that you want to consider. The second thing you want to consider is now the lenses. This is where the setup is going to vary for you. So it really comes down to the kind of shooting that you're gonna do and the amount of flexibility that you want. The general first go-to option for most people who don't know what kind of shooting that they do, but they generally wanna have the flexibility of range, then my suggestion is to shoot with something like a standard zoom lens. So in the scope of APS-C, a standard zoom lens would be something that's 18 to 50, 17 to 55, something along those ranges. It is the equivalent on a full frame of 24 to 70 millimeter. Now, this is a native E-mount lens that is manufactured and distributed by Sigma for the Sony E-mount. And so this is a really good lens. One of the folks that I work with got this lens, and it is fabulous in the sense of it's an f2.8. So it's generally a good lens. And if you want to see what that actually looks like, so I'm going to showcase the equivalent, what 17 to 55 looks like. Essentially, this is a, so I'm going to showcase to you what an 18 to 50 would look like. So I have here an adapted 17 to 55, very similar in relation to focal length. This is essentially what it looks like. So I'm going to, because this is an adapted lens, I'm going to be manually focusing. And so this is all the way zoomed out to 17. So if we're talking about 18, let's bring that to it. So this is about 18 millimeters right here. So if you're talking about the same, so this is, if I were to zoom out to 18 mil on this guy, this is 18 millimeters, but this is f1.8. This is 18 millimeters, but this is f2.8. So you'll notice the difference in background blur, right? And now if you were to go to 55, this is what the image kind of looks like at 55 millimeters. I'm actually out of focus, so let me go ahead and focus that up. So this right here is about 50 millimeters. If you're looking for some kind of background blur, this is at arm's length. This is the kind of image that you're gonna get at 50 millimeters. This Sigma lens is gonna be sharper than what I just showed you because this is a slightly older lens that I've adapted to Sony, but it gives me the same range. The only thing that I miss out on is the autofocus because I'm adapting lenses. So this is something to keep in mind if you want to have reliable autofocus, you want to have native E-mount lenses. This is one of the lenses that I would recommend. Now, another option is if you are looking for a lens that gives you more background blur and is a little bit better in low light settings, then a second option would be this guy right here. This is the Viltrox 23mm f1.4. To give you an example of what that looks like, this is the you'll notice it's brighter, right? Because it's at f1.4. This is what the image looks like. If you want to bring it a little bit closer, you want to get that, background blur, because the closer the camera is to the subject, the blurrier the background is going to be. But if you want to maintain that arm's length type of view, you still get plenty of background blur. Again, if this is something that you're looking for, you'll have autofocus, all of that good stuff. This is 24 millimeters, so 23 millimeters is almost identical to this particular look. So I hope that kind of gives you an idea of what a 23 millimeter looks like. Now, the other lens that's also an option, now I'm not suggesting you get all three of these. Maybe you can, if your budget would allow you to, for sure. But if not, and you have to pick one of these, we'll talk about which one might be suitable based on the look, right? And then this here is the Viltrox 16 millimeter f1.8. This here is what the 16 millimeter looks like at 1.8 in terms of, it's a wide angle lens. generally speaking. And if you wanted to get like a close-up look in terms of how it looks, if you're in focus, this is the kind of background blur you end up getting. Now, the good thing about the Viltrox is that if in the future you later want to upgrade to full frame, this is also a full frame lens. And so in a full frame body, it'll give you essentially even wider field of view as opposed to what you're seeing over here. So the good thing about this is gives you that wide angle look, and if you move in close enough, it'll give you a little bit of that background blur. But the downside is that because it's a wide angle lens, you're gonna get some of that distortion. So as you notice, as I get closer to the camera, if I get closer to the lens here, then my ears kind of disappear behind my head. Some people like that look, some people don't. I don't really prefer, I'm not a big fan of the spaghetti arms type of look, but whereas normally I will go for something like this that gives me normal looking or less distortion essentially. So these are the different looks that you get with these different lenses. Now, I didn't use the same exact lenses, but I used similar focal lengths. So in terms of the field of view, the background blur, all of that is going to be very similar. And so, and these are the prices for it, right? The 16mm goes for about $550 US. The 23mm, which is a little bit more of a portrait lens, goes for about $280. And the zoom lens goes for about $480. And so if you pair depending on which lens you pair, the body and lens, ends up being priced appropriately. And this is as of June 22nd, 2023. Prices are subject to change based on supply and demand, as well as inflation. So keep that in mind if you are viewing this at a later date. So we've got a little bit more room for some of the other essentials, which has to do with accessories. So let's talk about some of these accessories. Accessory number one is a SmallRig Cage. So you'll notice here, I've got a SmallRig Cage. This, I believe, is an essential item. Any kind of camera that you have, you want to put some sort of protection around it, especially with consumer-based cameras. You drop these things, they will crack, they will break. I've dropped one of these before, and it did crack, and I did put the crack back in place, and I quickly purchased a cage. But the good thing about the cage also, now mind you, is there going to be a change in size? Yes. So this is the cage, this is with the cage, this is without the cage. So there's going to be you're going to get substantially greater grip, which I definitely am appreciative of. And in terms of the height, this is the change in height, but I much prefer this because you're going to get an Arca Swiss mount on the bottom. You get a little what's it called, one of these magnetic washers to be able to adjust any screws and things like that. You get a bunch of mounting holes on the tops and the side, and it's still relatively portable. You get a little cold shoe mount right at the bottom here, and if you want to add additional mounts or cold shoe mounts, you can most definitely do that based on the mounting screws that the cage basically gives you the option to be able to do. So I much prefer the cage. It's much easier to hold, even when you get bigger and heavier lenses. Having a big lens on a small body becomes a non-issue. Whereas if you have a small body, there is like, right at the moment you loosen up that grip, it's not very secure. And so, but if you hold it like this way, then you might be able to hold it. But again, it's not very secure. As opposed to here, that there's that rubber texture that kind of holds on to it. So it allows you a little bit more grip. So having a cage, I believe, is an essential item that you need to have on your camera, without a doubt. So that's about $50 right there. The second item has to do with is a tripod. Get yourself a simple, at least a basic tripod if you don't have one already. It's about $65, $66 for this basic Gikoto 64-inch camera tripod. However, I would highly advise and recommend that when you get the opportunity to, definitely do get a proper tripod where you spend about $300-400 at least, that will not fall over with a slight bump or gust of wind. So that's something to definitely consider. But at the bare minimum, you need something to be able to mount your camera on, especially if you're going to talk about taking photos with family. Like holidays come around, you want to do that family portrait. It's very helpful to have even a cheap tripod to mount your camera onto. So that's one. The other thing also is, what are you going to record your media on? So get yourself a SanDisk Extreme Pro reliable SD card, 128 gig, or even a 256 gig. But for the purposes of, 128 gig, get maybe one of these at least to get you started, and you can buy more later on in the future. The next item here is this here is wireless microphone. So generally, at this stage, if you're starting out, get something, right? Something that plugs into your camera. Hollyland is a known brand. Although I don't use, or nor have I ever used, this particular brand itself. I have a different video on the different microphones that I've used and I recommend. But if you're starting out, generally something under $100, Hollyland would be a good place to start. It's got 995, 4.5 stars. 72% positive, 5-star reviews. So, and I've seen a bunch of reviews of this where it works just fine. So, yeah, I mean, it's battery operated. You might have to charge it. It comes with a few additional accessories. Good place to start. If you have the means to, then you could upgrade to a DJI wireless. But again, we were trying to keep within the budget of $1,600. The other one is you want a couple of lights, right? So something along the lines of, so what I'm using here, just to kind of give you an idea, in the budget here, I put 2 of these RGB lights. And it'll cost you about $40. Get one light. So right now, like the way that I'm being lit is I've got a light down there in the corner that's bouncing off the wall. And normally I actually forgot to. Yeah, normally I have that edge light that's on, also bouncing off the back wall. So now I don't have these exact lights, but it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter which lights you get so long as they don't flicker. These guys, they don't really flicker from what I told. A couple of my colleagues have these for their streaming needs. Next item is you want to have some little stands for the lights. So option 1 is you can get yourself some Amazon Basics aluminum photography tripod lights, and put one in one corner and put one in the other corner, and you're good, right? And you can put them away, fold them up when you're done shooting. Next item is power for the lights. You've got a couple of these USB-C charging bricks, which come with 3 outputs, 2 USB-C outputs and 1 regular USB output. And if you were to essentially get 2 of these, is my recommendation. And with that, you're gonna wanna get a couple of these 2-pack USB-C cables. And so get a couple of 10 feet ones, that should be more than enough. If you need a little bit more, you can get the 15 feet ones. Yeah, if you want a 15-foot one, it's gonna cost you $20 for just one. So it's actually double the price for 5 feet more. I don't think you need more than 10 feet personally. So get 2 of these, so you end up with 4 USB-C cables. That essentially completes your kit. So you spend just over $350 for the accessories, which includes your cage, your tripod, your SD card, mic, lights, light stand, USB power. And the same USB power can be used to also charge the camera. You can basically plug this camera in via USB-C right here when you're operating the camera itself. And so that way you can run for hours of record time without worrying about the lack or without worrying about your battery essentially running out. And so that essentially completes the basic kit. Now, depending on which lens that you get for your setup, whether it's the 23 or the 18-50 or the 16, your price is going to be between $1,300 to $1,600. So it's about a $300 some difference between the lowest and the highest price. That just keeps you just within the budget, or just around the budget of $1,600. Well, I'm not including the cost of tax, whatever the tax percentage is, sales tax percentage is within wherever you live. You may also want to consider the cost of that when you're making this purchase. So that'll keep you within your budget. almost all of these accessories, except for the cage, will transfer into whatever else that you buy in terms of another camera. Because these are Sony E-mount lenses, my recommendation would be, if you do upgrade to a full frame in the future, whether it's an A7C, because keep in mind, an A7C, as we talked about earlier, is, if you buy it brand new, is literally $1,000 more than the what's it called, the ZV-E10. $700 versus $1,800. Now you could probably buy it used for $1,510. I've seen it go on eBay used for bid anywhere between $1,200 to $1,400 on the regular. If you watch it, I always have it on my watch list. The lowest I've seen a A7C go for was just over $900, but there was a small defect on the, in terms of the body itself. I guess it was just heavily used and somebody was selling it, and so it went just like that. Literally within the day that it was posted, it was just over $900 and somebody picked it up, despite the fact that it was heavily used. So the A7C, if you really want to get it and it's used, you could expect to pay $1,200 as opposed to $700 for the. Now the A7C is a better body and a better camera than the ZV-E10, except for a couple of things. And I think one of those things is what's known as active stabilization, but I don't think the active stabilization is going to be all that beneficial, except that you're just kind of trying to eliminate micro jitters when you're hand holding in a zoom lens, if that makes any sense. So and the context of that would be like, you know, for example, my kid's swimming class, we were shooting, basically watching him swim, and the lens itself didn't have any stabilization. It was this guy right here, right? Boom. And right, nice zoom lens, goes to 105 millimeters, from 28 to 105 millimeters of 2.8 Tamron lens EF adapted. So when I'm zoomed in all the way, there's gonna be, there's gonna be little micro jitters that are gonna translate heavily on the long end. So having active steady shot, or active dynamic, or whatever it's called, active steady shot enabled, will eliminate those micro jitters. Versus if you don't have it enabled, this is what's gonna end up looking like. So the Sony A7C does not have that feature built into it. However, and that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to, because I used a Sony A7C for about 2 weeks. It was a great camera all around, and if I wanted a camera just for talking head, yes, I would absolutely keep that. But I was looking for a camera that I could use in a dynamic setting, and in that case, I would just rely on gyro data stabilization, which both of these cameras have, but the gyro data stabilization is almost always superior with relation to its ability to stabilize over whatever the camera is doing internally. So that's one of the reasons I also recommend Sony, but it's an added step in the post-processing, but that's a discussion for another time. If you want low light capabilities, then my recommendation, yes, you may want to increase your budget by $1,000. That's going to go towards a body, either the A7C or a lens that is f1.4 or brighter. And in this case, if you pair an 18mm f1.8 with a full frame body, and if you're wondering what a 16mm ultra wide looks like, here, this is an example I shot with the A7C and 16mm at f2.8. This is the kind of field of view that you would be getting, generally speaking. If you're talking about having a full frame setup with a Sony A7C combo, it's gonna run you nearly $1,000 more. We're looking at $2,300 for the A7C and Sigma Zoom, which is, I think, a great combination to have as a standard. Another alternative, one more, that you can consider for your lenses is a Tamron 20 to 40mm f2.8 for Sony E-mount. The great thing about this lens is that this is a good range that's wide enough to use on APS-C lenses. And at the same time, it is, to kind of give you an idea, what does 20 millimeters? This is what 20 millimeters on an f2.8 on a crop sensor. This is the field of view that you would get, 20 millimeters. And this is what 40 millimeters looks like. Very up close, very portrait, you get plenty of background blur. I think if you can swing it with regards to your budgeting and stuff, I would say the Tamron 20 to 40 millimeter is a great lens, which would then allow you to transition between full frame and crop sensor, or between crop sensor and full frame in the future. And the great thing is that the Sony A7C itself has a crop mode. So if you want to switch to 1.5x and you want to get a little bit more reach between the 20 and 45, which is essentially what I just showed you. And what does 20 and 40 look like on full frame? So this is what 20 millimeters looks like on, would look like approximately on full frame, f2.8. This is the kind of background blur that you get if you wanted to bring it close and let's say autofocus is enabled. This is the kind of look that you would get. But then if you pop on a 40 mil, this is essentially 40 millimeters on full frame. It gives you a little bit more, what's it called? A little bit more, a wider field of view, but it's relatively close. And you get that tight field. But then again, you can always cut to the tighter view with an A7C. So you're essentially getting two cameras in one with the Sony A7C. So in summary, is it worth getting the A7C over the Sony CVE10? For the additional $1,000, in my opinion, yes. Specifically because, again, if you were to get the Tamron 20 to 40, so this is, I've updated the spreadsheet. You can find the link to the spreadsheet and all the links to Amazon, whatever, in the description below. But if you want full frame, you're gonna pay a little bit more. Personally, if you were to get a zoom and body combo and with a crop sensor but upgrade to a full frame later in the future, then go with the Tamron. Honestly, if I were to buy a native Sony E-mount zoom lens today, I would probably consider the Tamron 20 to 40 specifically. In fact, I actually have the Tamron 20 to 40 on my purchase list for a lens to purchase as my next native E-mount lens. Actually, I don't actually have any native E-mount lenses. Almost all of my lenses are either Sigma Art, which pair well with the Sigma MC11, or they're or have the 16 to 50 kit lens. But if I were to get a zoom lens, it would be this one, the Tamron 20 to 40. So this way, if I were to swap between crop sensor and full frame, I have that option. 40 is plenty tight, but it's also wide enough for me to capture the event, the surroundings and whatnot. And when it comes to like distant zoom stuff, if it's for family stuff and shenanigans, I have no problem manual focusing. If it's for any client work, I would rent a lens that's appropriate for that. So I hope this was helpful for you. I know we kind of went a little bit, we kind of workshopped the answer, and I hope you find this of value. This is the basic kind of setup that I have for the folks that I work with, and this is the recommendation that I have for you. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you soon.